really bomb career. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I am Ashley Janelle, and today we are talking all about user experience design. I am really excited for this conversation and all of the various topics that we're going to cover. But before we get into it, make sure that you're subscribed. This is going to be a series and I don't want you to miss anything. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and now let's get into it. So I asked you guys all over my social media to send me questions, and what I found was that there were so many different questions and so many different ways that I could cover this. So what I'm gonna do is break all of these questions down into series. So this is gonna be part one, and there will be several series to follow. So that's why it's really important. Make sure you're subscribed so that you don't miss anything. But we're going to get into the different questions that you guys have, and I am going to kind of separate them out by theme. So we're really going to start at the very beginning. So if you're someone who is interested in breaking into UX design, maybe you're transitioning over from another field, maybe you're trying to see if this is the field for you, make sure that you are subscribed, and these are going to be the video series that are really going to help you. Before I actually get into your questions though, I want to kind of introduce myself so that you guys have a perspective of me, who I am, and where I'm coming from when I'm answering all of these questions. And you're not asking yourself, who is this girl who thinks that she is qualified to answer all of these questions? So, like I mentioned, my name is Ashley Janelle. I am a user experience designer, a user experience researcher, user interface designer, and we'll get into all the different types of designers. But I am someone who has worked as a UX designer for the last about 7 years. I've been a designer in general for about the last 12 years. I went to school for interactive arts and media, which is a fancy way of saying web design and graphic design. This was before UX was really a thing or really had a name or had a program attached to it at a college. So was working as a web designer, graphic designer, and just really wasn't feeling fulfilled in my career. I had a mentor that told me about UX design. I ended up taking a boot camp, and that propelled me very quickly into the field of UX, and the rest is kind of history. So as I've worked, as I've been a UX designer, I've worked at 3 different companies, some smaller companies, large companies, big tech companies. So my perspective is going to be very well-rounded from just not only being a designer, but also being a UX designer. I also run a UX boot camp. So I work with students who are looking to transition in 16 weeks via my course, and they are transitioning all the time. So my perspective is also not limited to me having been a designer or started as a designer several years ago, gone through my boot camp several years ago. I also work with students just like yourself, aspiring UX designers each and every day. And so my perspective also comes through them as well as I help them. And as the industry changes and as I have to be up on, new things. And, obviously I interview for roles myself at different companies, different size companies. So through my own experience and through the experience of my students, that's how I am here today and able to answer your questions, very qualified and educated around not only the subject of UX, but what it takes to actually become a UX designer, because that's really what we're talking about. So that's my little intro so that you guys know a little bit more about me. And now we're gonna get into a lot of your questions. And your questions, like I said, I've broken them out into different themes. So let's go ahead and get started actually talking about something that feels very basic, but I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. And that is, what is UX design? So UX design is often a short phrase that we use to reference user experience design. User experience design is the way that something works. So we also have UI design, that is a short phrase that we use to reference user interface design. User interface design is how it looks. So when you think about an application on your phone and you open it up and you go and you hit a button, and then that button takes you to one page, and maybe you hit a drop down, and that drop down gives you another set of information, and then you click into that, and then you kind of go on this long flow. That's more of the UX. That's the how it works. The UI is the color, the fonts, the imagery, how something looks, how inviting an application looks to you, how inviting an application doesn't look to you. Light themes, dark themes. That's the UI of it all. There was a question that was asked that was, can you do both? And the answer is absolutely. I, as someone who, again, has gone through a boot camp, has worked at different companies, has been on the other side of hiring, has worked with students, I always tell aspiring UX designers to aim to do both. It is very important not only that you are more marketable when you actually go out to try to find a job, that you can say that you can do both the strategy and the high fidelity UI design, but also it's really good to make sure that you know how to do both sets of skills. They really go hand in hand, and it's not particularly often that you will find a job where they just want you to focus on strategy or they just want you to focus on the UI. You may find contract roles that are like, oh yeah, we need a UI designer because we need to really crank out these designs really quickly. But most of the time, a good full-time role is going to want you to at least have experience doing both. So most of the time, UX designers are going to be able to do both the strategy and the high fidelity UI work. Now, that actually brings me to another point that I actually made when I was talking about when I was giving an overview of a day in the life of a UX designer, and I will link that video so that you guys can go and check that out, because there's a lot of useful information in there about kind of like my day as a UX designer, kind of talking through different challenges, different pain points, and different pros and things like that. But the other role that we're actually going to talk about a little bit later is UX researcher. So a UX researcher is oftentimes a role that isn't really talked about when we talk about UX. It always, to me, feels like UX research is like over here and then UX UI is over here, when really they all go together. And as we talk about, should I do both? Can I do both? You really should be at least learning both. It's really important, just like it's really important for a UI designer to understand UX and a UX designer to understand UI. It's really important for you to also understand UX research. You might be asked one day to conduct research. You might be tasked with reading a research report and having to make sense out of it. You might be asked to sit in meetings with the UX researcher and kind of help them crank out designs as they are doing research. So it's really important to have a really good understanding of the questions that researchers ask, how they actually get to the crux of the information that they're actually trying to get to. It just really helps you become a better UX designer if you understand and can but can conduct your own research if you need to. We'll get to UX research a little later, but I did just want to touch on that. It's really important to, as you are learning, you may as well learn all of it. In my course, in the 16-week course, we teach everything. So once you leave that course, you are qualified to become a UX researcher, a UX designer, or a user interface designer. Another question that was asked was, do I need a background in design, like graphic design? And the answer is absolutely not. There are so many ways that you can learn how to become a designer. You can take a boot camp. We'll get into like the different ways to actually transition, and we'll talk about like boot camps, courses, self-taught, but there's so many different ways through different boot camps if they offer it. We offer UI design in my boot camp. There are other courses online that just talk about how to design. They talk about the various elements of design, like color, shape, color theory, spacing, all that kind of stuff. So do you need to come in knowing how to draw or knowing how to be a graphic designer? The answer is absolutely not. Those are all skills that you can learn and pick up. So I know I mentioned that we were going to talk about UX research. So let's get into it. You know, UX research, honestly, is a field, like I mentioned earlier, that I feel like is not talked about enough. And I don't really know why that is, because user research is such a bomb career path. If you are someone who really enjoys helping a user accomplish a task or making whether it's an application or just a product in general better for a user, you enjoy talking to people, if the UX field in general is something that you enjoy, but let's say you're not necessarily keen on like pixel perfect like design or the strategy of like actually carrying out the research in, you know, more of a design execution form, you don't have to do that. UX research is a really great option. If you're someone who likes to write, if you're someone who likes to talk to people, if you're someone who really likes to get to the understanding of a problem, UX research is a career that you really, really should entertain. So what is a UX researcher and what do they do? UX researchers are kind of, to put it mildly and to put it simply, it is a UX researcher's job to become an expert at whatever area of focus that they have been assigned to. So the way that I think I explained it in another video was like, if you are working for Google and you work on the Gmail team and you are working on, let's say, inbox, okay, and you are all focused on inbox, it is your job to become an expert on inbox. It is your job to become an expert on how the inbox works, how users are expecting the inbox to work. It is your job to stay up to date on new features that come about from, like, let's say other competitors like Outlook or Apple Mail, and how are they doing things related to inbox? What new features are they releasing? Are these features that our users might want to use? What pain points are currently going on with the inbox that we can try to solve? It is your job to become an expert at whatever that thing is. I just gave a very narrow example. Oftentimes, you know, depending on the role that you're in, you might be in something that's like super focused like inbox, or you might be in charge of an entire platform like Gmail in general. So now you're working and it's your job to kind of understand the entire Gmail platform as a whole. Okay, so I was just giving different examples, but you do this through various techniques like user research, where maybe you actually sit down with a user. If it's a case like Gmail, you maybe sit down with them. If maybe you work or your job is focused in like physical spaces, you actually go out to that space where users are actually using whatever product in the field. And you get to know them, you get to understand them, you get to have conversations with them, you get to see how things are working now, you get to understand their day-to-day, what pain points they have in the product that it is that you're working on. And you essentially come away with findings and take those findings back to your team. And from there, the UX team and the PMs and project managers, everyone gets together and they try to figure out, okay, what are some of these things that we're going to actually work on? That's a very broad overview, but essentially that's what the UX researcher does. They create reports of their research findings. It is their job to, you know, really be the spokesperson for the user. It's a really bomb career. And again, if you're someone who doesn't really want to design and you just want to focus on, you know, how users are feeling and what's working for them, what's not working for them, and really getting to the crux of answering their problems, UX research is a career that you should definitely go for. So oftentimes the question is, okay, well, you know, what background do you need to have for a UX researcher? Because, you know, a lot of times people will say that they've seen jobs that recommend like a psychology degree or something like that, or a master's in psychology or a master's in something else. And honestly, just like with UX in general, these fields are so new. There is no one size fits all. There is no you have to have this or you have to have that. Even if you're applying for jobs and it says that they, you know, suggest that you have a psychology degree, if you know that you know you're a good UX researcher, apply for that job. It's such a new field that everyone is coming from everywhere. And what happens is you bring your experiences from other places that you've worked or other experiences that you've had in other workplaces. And you would be surprised how you can apply those to your new role as being a UX researcher. Again, we'll get into how you develop these skills, just like how you develop, you know, UX or UI skills as well. But I just want you to understand that there is no specific background or major that you need to have for UX in general, but let alone UX research. So just wanted to make sure that we're clear there. So again, UX research, if you've never heard of it, please look up like a day in the life of a UX researcher at, you know, X company, really trying to understand what they do. If you are someone who is looking to transition into UX, whether you're, like I said, and we're going to talk about this in a second, you want to take a course or you want to be self-taught or you want to do a boot camp, make sure that you are learning all aspects of the UX process. That includes UX research. So now we're going to touch on salary. And one thing I will say about salary, just because it's often asked, like, how much does a UX designer make, or how much does a UX researcher make? I would behoove you to just Google it, to be honest. And the reason why I say that is because oftentimes these numbers change. And not even oftentimes, but these numbers change a lot. The tech field is one of those fields where you can move up very quickly and things are changing very fast. So with that, these numbers are always changing. So if you watch this video today, in a year from now, these numbers might be totally different. So I would behoove you to Google UX designer salary in X city, because that's also going to play a part in the amount of money that you're compensated as well. Another thing that will contribute to the compensation are the companies in general. So you will have a base pay. You can also have bonuses and other areas of compensation that add to your total compensation number. So just really be mindful as we're talking about these things. I know, and I'm going to throw out some numbers in a second, but I just want to make sure that we're all clear, because I see this a lot where, people give these general numbers and it's like, well, not really, because this is a factor, that's a factor, this is a factor. So just make sure that you are taking all of those things into account when you're looking on your own. So I just pulled something up right on Glassdoor, and I'm specifically talking about entry-level UX design careers because that's what we're talking about. So in Chicago, which is where I live, and again, I got very specific with the city, which is what you want to do, the average pay for a UX designer is going to be about $106,000. And that's entry level. That's like 0 to 1 years of experience, about $106,000. So again, that is broken down into your base pay and then any other areas of compensation like bonuses. So your base pay, the average base pay for a UX designer in Chicago, an entry-level UX designer in Chicago, is about $88,000, and the rest of that compensation is made up of bonuses and things like that. So again, just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. UX research is also a bit of a different salary because it is a bit of a different career title and duties and things like that. So if UX research is another thing that you're interested in, go ahead and do the same thing. UX researcher salary in X city. And then, entry level, things like that. And then you can also do the same thing with more senior designer or more senior researcher, just to get an idea of what the going rate is for someone who has, a lot more experience and things like that, and kind of what to expect. So that's kind of where I want to end with salary, but I really want to put the onus on all of you to do your due diligence around that yourselves, because salary, it fluctuates, it changes all the time. It also depends on the company that you're working at. So, are you working at a startup? Are you working at a mid-sized company? Are you working at one of the big tech companies? All of that changes the salary. So you really have to get specific. So one of the questions that was asked, and I'm kind of rephrasing this a little bit, but who is the UX field for? So if we think about someone who is interested in maybe being a scientist, I'm sure we can think of some characteristics of people who are scientists, some things that they like to do, things that they find enjoyable. When we talk about being a UX designer, what are some of those things? So I would definitely say if you're someone who likes to solve problems, this is a field for you. And I talk about this again in that day in the life of a UX designer video. UX is all about solving problems. No matter if you are a UX designer and you're actually designing, or you are a researcher, your job is all about solving problems. So if you're someone who doesn't really like to solve problems, and maybe likes people to solve them for you, this may not be the field for you. This is definitely a field where you are expected to have answers. And there's no one to kind of look to say, okay, well, what's the answer? Or I don't have the answer. You have to have the answer. No matter, like I said, if you are designing and someone asks you how something works or how something interacts, or, different things like that, or you are a researcher and you have, maybe the head of the department asking you, okay, so how are users feeling about this new feature that we rolled out, or how are they feeling about that? You have to have an answer, because it's kind of your job to find those things out. So problem solving is definitely one. Another thing that I would say is this field is definitely for people who like to be creative. So if you're someone who likes endless possibilities of a solution, this is also a career for you. This career definitely allows you to exercise your creativity, whether that's through design. And I think that kind of speaks for itself, coming up with multiple ways of doing something, coming up with multiple ways of how something looks and functions. That's really enjoyable. And I would also say the same thing on the UX research side as well. Once you learn, some of the maybe pain points that users are having, you can then make a series of recommendations and then get creative with the ways that we do those and carry those out. So it's definitely a field that allows you to be expressive and creative, and it's really nice to actually see those things get put into action through the design and things like that, and through the actual solution. It's really, really rewarding. I will also say that this career is also for you if you're someone who likes to work from home. I'm never going to shy away from a lot of those kind of perks as well. If you're someone who is looking for a work from home job, or a job where you can travel and still work, or maybe you like to go to the office and maybe you find a job that is hybrid or is requiring people to come to the office. This job allows for a lot of flexibility. So that's also a huge plus. It's a huge plus for me. And I will, like I said, never shy away from the work-life balance of it all. So that's going to be another definitely positive for a lot of UX designers. And lastly, I will say, and these are again in no order, but if you are someone who has the ability to have empathy for other people, this is definitely a job for you. A lot of times we don't know where we're going to end up working, what companies. And I'll just use this as an example. You might be working for a company that works with children. Or a company that works with older people, maybe seniors. And so you're designing now for children, or you're designing now for seniors. And at that point, you are no longer designing for yourself or for someone who is around your age group and might be a lot more technologically savvy. You now have to empathize with children and the fact that they really don't know how to do a whole lot. They may get a device, or they may get some sort of physical object, and they may just start clicking or just start pushing things because they're waiting for a response because they don't know what to do yet. Same thing similarly with older people. They may not necessarily know, what an icon represents the way that people like us would, who, they may not necessarily know what some things are, the way that they may be intuitive to people who spend a lot of time on the internet or a lot of time using different applications. They may have a difficulty reading certain things because maybe they're too small, so maybe we have to design for them to be a lot larger. So really having empathy for your audience, if you are someone who has that skill, this is definitely going to be a good field for you. So now let's get to the fun stuff. How exactly do we break into being a UX designer? That was probably the most asked question. And my answer for that is always simple. There are a few options to breaking into UX. They're usually going to be a boot camp. A boot camp is going to be a very regimented course. It's going to be very structured. It is going to give you a start date and an end date. And it is typically a course that like I said, you have a start date and an end date. So it's typically very quick. It allows you to kind of get in and get out. And we'll talk about some of that as well. But then you also have other types of courses that may be more go at your own pace. A lot less regimented, things like that. You also have, if you're still in school or maybe you're wanting to get your master's degree or something like that, there are programs obviously at various universities and colleges. And then there's the self-taught route, where actually you're the one that's kind of sourcing through the information yourself. And again, we'll kind of break all of these down, but those are the different options. And what I always say is, after taking a look at the different options, you really want to understand how it is that you learn best and what fits best into your life at that moment in time. And that's going to be how you decide what method works for you. So actually where we're going to end is with another question that I got that I absolutely loved, which is, what is your favorite part about being a UX designer? And I will say that my favorite part about being a UX designer is helping people and also the flexibility. So on one aspect, I'm talking about my actual job, like what it actually means for me to be a UX designer, like the actual job itself. And for me, it's helping people. And on the other side, I'm talking about the work-life balance, the freedom, which is also very important, right? Because we want our work to kind of fit into our lives and not our lives fitting into our work. And for me, that's very important. Some other people might feel differently, but at the end of the day, I'm not really living to work. So I want to make sure that I have as much freedom and my work-life balance is something that works for me so that I'm happy when I do open my computer every day and I am talking to people and I'm in meetings and things like that. So on the other side, when it comes to helping people, like I mentioned earlier, when you really sit down and talk to your users and you understand that they are having pain points that you are solving or have solved, and now their jobs or whatever it is that they were trying to do is just that much better because of something that you thought about or something that your team created or an idea that you had, it's really, really rewarding, and it feels like you are accomplishing something. It almost feels like it almost feels as good as checking a task off of a list. That's kind of how I like to think about it. So for me, that's really, really rewarding. It's almost like when your favorite application has a feature that you've been waiting for and you've been like, how long is it gonna take for you guys to roll this feature out so that I can do this and then I don't have to do all these other things just to do this one thing? Or maybe it's a feature that they roll out that you didn't even know that you wanted, and you're having a much better time. You're having a much more enjoyable experience with that particular product or application. It feels very similar to that. Just being on the other end of it, that you are the one that actually created it. So for me, that's going to be my favorite part of the job. And like I said, also the work-life balance. So that is actually where we're going to wrap the video for today. Like I said, the next video, we're going to talk about the pros and cons of different ways to. Like I said, in the next video, we're actually going to talk about the different ways to break into the industry. So we're going to talk about things like, should I take a boot camp? Is it necessary? What are the pros and the cons of being self-taught? What are the pros and the cons of being a part of a boot camp? We're going to talk about all of those things. And like I said, we have much more information to come. We're going to talk about portfolios, interviews. We're going to talk about those of you who are transitioning from other fields and maybe are feeling a little bit of anxiety. How do I do this? Is this something that I can do? You absolutely can. And so we're going to cover all of that in this UX series. Check out that day in the life of a UX designer video. I feel like it really paints a picture of what it is that UX designers do, who we work with, pain points that we have throughout the day, things of that nature. So until the next video, I hope you guys be well, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.